Well, that last panel was really, really interesting. Great insights, very sobering. How many out here have actually been a part of a closing at some point in your careers and actually been a part of a company that closed on a round of financing? Quite a few of you out there. And it's a pretty exciting day when the money comes in and everyone's quite excited. But of course, at that point, the work begins. And the last panel had 3 investors who were strategics and 2 financial investors. This panel has no strategic investors, so we're all financial investors. And the one point to initially make is that none of us are investing in pre-IPO rounds. And so, there's more financing to be done prior to the company actually generating enough cash not to require additional financing. And so as we thought about what we could convey to you that would be valuable, we thought about the need to make sure that you don't run out of cash. And as we heard yesterday, there were 150 companies so far that are trying to develop eVTOL products. And in comparison, in the US auto industry, there were 755 companies that were formed that no longer exist. And so, it's quite clear that probably not, as Raj pointed out from the last panel, not all the companies are going to be around. And there's one company in this industry already that managed to raise $118 million and sadly, went out of business this year. They hit the wall pretty quickly and literally went out of business within a day of hitting the wall. And so one of the things that we thought we could talk about here is each of the people give their backgrounds is what are the things that we do to try to make sure that you don't hit that wall? Because clearly, though Raj can't predict which ones are going to be the great winners, when Raj writes the check, he's not looking down at his feet and thinking that he just lost all this money. He's hoping it's going to be a success for each of the investments that he makes, and the same with the other panelists, and the same with these panelists as well. So talk a bit about what it is that you do and how it is you try to make sure that your companies in which you invest don't hit the wall. First to you, Kevin.
Okay. Hi, it's an honor to be here. My name is Kevin Sara. I'm partner at Aster Capital. Aster currently invests across 3 themes. It's mobility, energy, and industry. We're more focused in Europe, but we're global. We have an office, headquarters is in Paris. We have an office in Cambridge, England, in San Francisco, in Tel Aviv, and in Nairobi. We really believe that there's something happening in aviation and that air transport will be disrupted by electrification in the same way that the automotive sector is currently being disruptive, and in the same way that there was this renewable energy revolution over the past decade that you heard a little bit about yesterday, and we saw the cost curves. And we really think that this is going to happen in aviation. And so we're currently raising a dedicated fund to invest in startups. We focus on seed and Series A. And we're looking at, I guess, 3 themes: the vertical takeoff and landing, fixed wing. We really believe in this distributed aviation and the electrification of regional aviation. We think that will happen fairly quickly. And then probably the most important theme is the picks and shovels, and looking at all the enabling technologies, including battery technologies, avionics, some of the infrastructure elements.
But to the question, though, once you've made your investment, how do you make sure that the companies don't run out of capital? Because typically, if you're writing a check for 200,000 pounds or 5 million pounds or something, the company's going to require more capital. So what are the things that you do to make sure that they don't?
Well, I guess once you get to Series A, you want to make sure that you have a syndicate and that you have like-minded investors joining the company. And also, strategics will be very important in this business. They're tricky to play with because you have to make sure that they don't limit your options for exit or limit your choice in your supply chain. But there are ways to manage it. There's also a lot of soft money available for the sector. Governments, I mean, it's not on the scale of Amazon and choosing their second headquarters, but states and regions actually will compete. If you have a startup company that's going to hire people and take advantage of a local supply chain, there's a lot of soft money available in terms of it can be just loans, it can be pure grants. This is really great for us financial investors because it's non-dilutive. I mean, even in the United Kingdom, Wales has a development bank, which gives if you establish a facility in Wales and hire some people. And so France also is notorious for all that. They both, there are subsidies and grants and loans available at the national level and also at the regional level. And some of them for startups, and also, once you have the much larger capital requirements of, building facilities.
Katerina, your venture debt, can you talk a bit about what you do and how you make sure that the companies in which you invest don't go belly up?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of my own background, Shearwater.Aero Capital was established to finance aircraft, specifically acquisitions of aircraft, specifically outside of commercial aviation and in business jets and general aviation. And what makes us unique is that we're asset-based, meaning that we don't look at the credit or the individual purchasing the aircraft and his ability to repay the loan. We look at the aircraft itself as the collateral. In the past year or two, we've seen our customer base shift from high net worth individuals more to entrepreneurs and specifically companies that are functioning within the regional aviation space, so solving the issues that have been left from the lack of regional airlines servicing these city pairs that before used to be connected. So what we're seeing is that there's more and more clients who don't have any financial background in terms of their ability to repay, but have are acquiring either aircraft or parts or real estate necessary to launch their company. So that makes us very interested because we see that as a way to participate in what is essentially a shift in the entire industry, away from aviation being focused on high net worth individuals trying to get from point A to point B, to something that is a little bit more focused on the general population. So that's a little bit just of a background on kind of why we're here and what we do. We give loans to whether it's companies or a lot of times it's early stage ventures specifically focused on the government contracts, for example. So we collateralize not only the aircraft, but also we look at contracts with government entities. And we really look for the infrastructure industry, specifically within energy, as our inspiration. So nobody's built a dam with pure equity investments before. So we see ourselves as a provider for structured debt solutions to what is essentially, as we look at the board, is going to be a very capital intensive venture. So yeah, we hope to partner with individuals like yourself, Kevin, to support the companies that you finance to allow them to get to point A to point B.
So Katerina, you mentioned yesterday when we met that there was a company that you had invested in the U.S., I won't name them, that didn't make it. And so what are the types of things that the equity investors could have done or should have done, or what are the things that you try to do to make sure that they didn't hit the wall?
That's a really interesting question. So we invest a lot of companies that don't make it. That particular one was a regional aircraft provider, similar to the one that I mentioned before, that was heavily subsidized by the government. And I think what went wrong in that specific case is they didn't have a very clear plan on how they were going to use their subsidy and how they were going to manage their cash flow. And the CEO didn't have a ton of background managing an airline. And I think the complexity of a project like that, it's really important to look at the team and their background and their ability to understand how money is going to be spent.
Okay, great. Patty, do you want to tell us again about a bit about what you do and how you try to make sure the companies in which you invest don't hit the proverbial cash wall?
Yeah, so we invest in very early stage companies, partly because we don't have a choice, because we're not a big fund, we're a family office. So we are looking for a reasonable position in extremely early stage companies. We looked at doing later stage businesses, but we found that the kind of the total return didn't necessarily improve. So by being in ultra early stage, it does mean we have to be very close. In fact, we have two bits of early market. One is investing in arm's length companies, and the other is more like an incubator. So we have a couple of businesses which we're incubating. And your question was how
in terms of once you've made your investment, how do you make sure that the companies in which you invest don't run out of cash and lose the investment you just made?
I think first of all, we think every company we invest in will survive. I mean, we're not doing a sort of 1 in 10 game. We can't afford to have a big diversified position. So we do quite a deep due diligence on each business we look at. And I think the short answer is really a sort of a conservative business plan. I mean, when we see a company present, we like to see, and we see some very unconservative business plans, but we like to see a pretty conservative business plan, and then we'll invest into that plan. We have sort of 3 parameters. So obviously, we want to see great ideas, and these are very, as we're a very early stage, we're having to think about where the world will be in 10 years' time, really. So great ideas, and obviously a very skillful and flexible team. But I think the third one is the price. So we want to invest at the right price, and so we do want to see realistic business plans.
All right, I want to turn next to the issue of strategic investors, and I posed the question: are they, is it Satan or are they the saviors of the company? Dean and I have had great experience with strategic investors. When we co-founded Volaris, which is the largest domestic airline in Mexico with market share 50% greater than Southwest. Its market share in Mexico is greater than British Airways is here in the U.S. You probably, or here in the U.K. You probably may not have heard of it, but it's a fantastic airline. But it wouldn't have really been successful at all, I think, unless we had been able to encourage a strategic investor, Taka Airlines, now part of a much larger airline, to invest with us and help us build the airline. So we had a great experience there. With Stellar Labs, we have a great fortune of having a terrific investor who's here from Collins Aerospace. And they actually didn't invest in terms of investing in the equity. They invested in helping us build the company by helping us rewrite a piece of software that they have called FOSS. And so they've been a great partner so far, though, again, they're not an equity investor. And we've had a great relationship so far with Boeing's Horizon X and Brian Shetler and Raj from JetBlue Ventures. And so, the industry is really fortunate to have some strategic investors who are not only casually interested, but actually deeply committed to investing in the space. And so that's my perspective in terms of the background that I've had or experience I've had with strategic investors. So I haven't had the Satan-like experience, though each time we consider a strategic investor coming in, or if they're already an investor, it's clear that you need to ensure that they haven't in some way muddied the water so that there's only one exit and they have too much power over what components are used or anything else with respect to aspects of the business that'll impair the value long term. But this industry is blessed to have the strategic investors. Though from the first question up there with how much capital is going to be required, you heard yesterday from Brian Shetler that they're investing in the order of magnitude of hundreds of millions, whereas you see that the majority of you think that the industry is going to require more than $50 billion of capital, and they're not looking to put that amount of money to work. And I believe Raj would also concur that the JetBlue is not looking to put billions of capital to work, at least on an annual basis. What are the experiences you all have had with strategic investors, and how have they been either saviors for the company or very helpful to the company, or have you had any experiences where they've been really harmful to the company?
Shall I start?
Kevin, sure.
Yeah. In this industry, and this is both for aircraft and also all the enabling technologies and battery technologies, strategic investors are pretty important. A lot of these companies take much longer to mature than the business plan said at the beginning, sometimes 2 or 3 times as long, and require more capital. So strategic investors tend to stick with it. They understand the core business, they understand the problems that the company is encountering, and when the financial investors have had enough of throwing money at not seeing the kind of progress at the speed that they were anticipating, the strategic investors can have longer staying power because they can understand it better, and also maybe they have more capital. I had this from an earlier fund. I invested in a battery company. It would not be here today. It has one of the most promising technologies, lithium-sulfur chemistry, which would really be, it might be the big breakthrough we're all waiting for aviation. They wouldn't be here today if they didn't have a strategic and industrial investor who was patient and understood and saw that there was promise, could understand the small incremental bits of progress that they were making. So yeah, the answer is that strategic investors are going to be very important and are probably going to be part of most of the companies in this ecosystem.
Katerina?
For us, strategic investors are extremely important because a lot of times they will be providing the guarantee for the loan. So it can be a complete game changer to have a partner who is willing to put themselves on the line for the company that they're invested in. And that, for us, a lot of times we see that in OEMs, so aircraft manufacturers, but also we're hoping that airlines will step up as well.
Okay. Patty?
Yeah, well, I think there's almost no disadvantage I can think of to having a strategic investor in a very early stage company. If someone comes to us and says, we've already got Airbus invested, that looks pretty good to us. So I can't think, there's one situation we had which was a self-driving business in Cambridge who wanted to have a large Japanese company own more than 50%, and we didn't think that made sense. But I mean, if it's a minority shareholding, a strategic investor with a good name, fantastic.
So as you're out looking for capital, part of the pitch that we have to make to the companies that are in which we want to invest is the value add that we can bring. And some investors will say, look, I'm hands off, I'm writing checks, and that's it. Most investors aren't quite like that. And so, in terms of the value add that you tell your companies or prospective investments that you're going to make, in which you're about to make an investment, what are the things that you promise, and what are the things that tend to have the biggest impact on the eventual success of those businesses? Go ahead, Kevin. Sure.
Okay. I think one of what we see for the early stage companies, seed stage companies, often the CEO, the senior management team, they want a bit of mentorship. They want your input on the big strategic decisions, and we're there for that. And even if it's, we can give input based on similar situations in other industries and other companies. So they find that very, very useful. And so having the personal chemistry and the personal relationship with the senior management team is extremely important. And I think that they value that, and we value that because we feel like we're contributing, and we also know what's going on. We know what are the questions that they're asking themselves because we're helping them to answer them. And then I guess the second is really having access to our networks and having access to large corporates that they wouldn't have access to potential customers, to potential suppliers. I think they value that to the extreme.
Do you help them to raise capital for the next round?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's part of the role as well, is to help put together a syndicate. Sometimes you have a CEO or a management team, or there's a CFO who's very active and who takes it upon him or herself to organize the financing. Sometimes not. Sometimes there's a bit of a vacuum there, and you help, you pitch in to help.
Katerina?
Yeah, likewise, we always work in a partnership with other investors, and so a lot of times we will find an opportunity that we find very intriguing and go out and source equity providers on behalf of our clients, for example. So we take a very active approach, not only in the fundraising, but also in the growth stages of the company. So being asset-facing, we have a lot of insights into values of aircraft as they track going forward, so we can give advice on which aircraft to acquire versus another. You know, we a lot of times put our clients in touch with part suppliers, or a lot of our newer client base is looking for very special mission kind of aircraft, and so we advise them on that as well.
And Patty?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. We have to look attractive as an investor to startups. There isn't a lot of money sloshing around, so we have to add value in other ways. And I think there's a couple of things are, one is that we have a growing network of aviation contacts, so we have to be good at thinking about that exit in the future. And also, we've brought companies to market before, so we've got kind of operational experience. So we do get approached by early stage companies who are full of excitement about their idea, but can be a little bit overwhelmed about the corporate governance and the operational side. And we can kind of give them a bit of a presence on that side.
I just noticed the Slido question that we have up here. So for the strategic investors who have been investing in the space, it looks like that they may wind up being at least, I guess, more than 50% would wind up being the big winners out of having made the investments. So it seems reasonable to have done so. From our standpoint at Diamond Stream, it really depends on how much capital we're deploying. If we're trying to get exposure to a space and writing a relatively small check, then the amount of involvement that we can have and the amount of value we can add is fairly limited at that point. But if it's something where we're investing in the tens of millions of dollars, then it is always the case that we're on the board of directors, and we're ex-Bain & Company consultants, and we've each run companies as CEOs before, and so we tend to get pretty actively involved with the management team to help drive the business faster. And typically these companies, as they're going through a number of changes, not everything goes right. In fact, most surprises in life I found are negative. And so, you know, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to help the management teams deal with the various problems that occur as the company goes through its evolution. And so the next, could you queue up the next Slido question? So the next, because I don't want to bum everybody out with it's going to take a lot of money and only the existing companies are going to win. I wanted to find out where the bulk of the investment required is going to come from over the next 5 years. And then there's another question. Actually, can you tee up the question on how many companies are likely to become unicorns, or worth $1 billion or more? Because I think not the former question, the next question, because I think that there will be some great winners that will come from the space. But the next question I wanted to pose to the panel is, in terms of the board of directors, how do you view that in terms of the composition of the board and how important it is to have the appropriate board of directors? If it's an earlier stage company, it's got to be a very different set of circumstances than if it's something in which $100 million has already been invested.
Yeah. Board composition is actually very important. I've been on boards which have been completely dysfunctional, and it really damages the company. And so there has to be a harmonious board, is because there's an alignment amongst the investors, and that's really important for a company to be successful and for the management team to be able to work with the board. The one problem that can be make things difficult is having a board which is too large, where every investor is insisting on having a board seat, and so just scheduling the board meetings becomes difficult and problematic. And then often you have to do them by teleconference instead of doing them in person, which can be a lot more productive. So you want to have a small board, and then you want to have people who have got a different viewpoint. You don't want just all like-minded people. You want people who are questioning. Some of the investors who really are not following the business day to day, and then they ask the awkward questions. You want that on the board. So it needs to be representative of the investors, but you need to have people who participate in the board meetings and actually add value. And you don't want the board to be too large.
Great. Katerina?
So we actually think that the board of directors is extremely important in that it's the role of the board to make sure that the company doesn't fail. So while the CEO and the management company is very important for us in evaluating the operational ability, we tend to look through that to the board to understand, like, if the CEO is not performing his job, do they have the network to replace him? Do they have the, or her, wherewithal to come in and change the management team to one that would be operational? So for us, it's actually extremely important.
And Patty?
Yes, I think keeping a check on the startup is the main thing, plus the marketing angle of having names on the board at the startup stage is pretty good. But really, I would say sort of smart and diverse would be what we look for in a board.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, you know, we always think that the accountability you think ends with the CEO, but as Katerina pointed out, I think the accountability ends with the board of directors. And far too often we've seen in earlier stage companies that the management teams want to continue to maintain ultimate control of the board and not really you know, open themselves up to the fact that, you know, they may know everything about the technology in which they're trying to build and all that, but they don't know everything in terms of how to build a great company. And the sooner that they, you know, get that realization, the easier it's going to be for them to raise capital, and the more likely they are, I think, to achieve some level of success. The the answer to the question up here, where will the bulk of the investment come from? Strategic partners. That's a problem if that's what the majority of you think, because, you know, if the industry is going to require in the magnitude of tens of billions of dollars, from what we've heard from meeting with Boeing's Horizon X and Raj at JetBlue, et cetera, that they're not prepared to make that level of commitment to the industry. And so, as Ian pointed out, I think on the prior panel, there is a great need for an ecosystem of institutional investors to come along and be developed. And one of the problems that's facing the industry right now is that there's no one really, there are very few institutional investors out there like that. Dean and I are investing in that space. We're raising more capital to invest in this space. Kevin, you're raising a fund to invest in this space as well.
I agree. That's a big issue, and it's for all of us in this ecosystem to, you know, get the word out that this is happening. But I think that there has to be success stories, and there has to be some aircraft flying. I think what Volocopter is doing is extremely important, just because it gives a lot of credibility to the industry. People see it's happening. A lot of people, institutional investors, are still saying, well, you know, flying cars, electric airplanes, you know, 2040, 2050. And so it's not, there is this lack of credibility amongst the institutional investors today that this is happening now. That's the biggest issue. And I think events like this are helpful. We need bigger events like this. There's no Uber Elevate in Europe. Uber Elevate was a huge catalyst to the ecosystem in the US. There needs to be that kind of catalyst here in Europe and in Asia.
Do you have any other comments on that, Katerina?
Absolutely. I mean, for us as debt providers, we tend to follow kind of in the second step, in the second wave, we tend to follow where the VC money goes. And so for us, it's extremely important that these new technologies are supported and are developed, because until we see a real market for the product, it's very hard for us to be able to invest.
And Patty, any other comments on that?
Well, there's just so much regulatory doubt, particularly in urban air mobility, that so many unanswered questions. I missed some of the sessions yesterday, but I guess it's going to be difficult to get investment funds until some of those questions are answered.
Good. Let's go to the questions out in the audience. There was one question that I saw that was, who lost the $118 million? The company that lost that, I'll give you a quote that they issued on the day that they shut down. History has taught us how hard it can be to call the timing of a market transition. Unfortunately, the market took longer to mature than we expected. As we worked through the various required pivots to position ourselves for long-term success, we ran out of financial runway. As a result, it is with a heavy heart that we notified our team, customers, and partners that we will wind down the business today. And so that was Airware. I'm not sure if any of you know of them or invested in them, but that was the company. Let's see. Is Uber Air going to run out of cash? It's interesting because Uber Air is just a I know some of the top executives at Uber, and they have remarkably created this intense interest in this industry by having invested a very, very, very small amount of cash. And so in terms of whether Uber runs out of cash, they might, but in terms of Uber Air, they're not looking to fund a major part of the development of the ecosystem. And so, I don't believe, I'll answer that question myself. Are there other questions out there from the audience? Yes.
Hi, Brian. My name's Porrick Murphy. I work for a commercial aircraft lessor called SMBC Aviation Capital. And Volaris is actually a customer of ours.
Oh, terrific.
And, just a question for you with your background and the panel also. In my position in the company, we're looking outwards now to see where the business is going to change over the next few years. You have companies like Spotify and Netflix, Uber, all these as examples where people don't want to own things anymore, they want to lease them. And you're talking about how you may get investment at the start to get these startups off the ground. Are the investors and the industry giving any thought to how they may finance these, or how who the owners may be going forward? Because at the moment we have 50% of the commercial aircraft fleet in the world, the passenger fleet, is owned by lessors, and they're being leased. So what consideration are investors giving to that at the moment?
I'll take the first crack, and then I want to hear what Katerina has to say. In commercial aviation, when we started Volaris, we knew that there were people who would fund us in acquiring the aircraft necessary to build the business. And the aircraft, as you know, are pretty expensive, much more expensive than the unit cost that will occur in this industry. And the reason that they were willing to fund a startup Mexican airline was because they knew, or they could easily predict what the residual value of the aircraft would be, because there was a great history of A320 aircraft in terms of what its value would be after a certain number of hours of flight. And so that issue for us wasn't really a major consideration, because we knew that as long as we put up the requisite $100 million that we did with Carlos Slim and Televisa and Taka Airlines, that we were going to be able to attract the lessors who would finance the aircraft for us as we built a multi-billion-dollar asset side of the balance sheet, and consequently liability side of the balance sheet as well with the leases. But Katerina, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a problem that we're actively trying to solve on a day-to-day basis. As all of these technologies evolve, they're going to need financing support, especially once they come out of production. And how to support that is a question that nobody's really been able to answer so far. We're working with OEMs that have launched aircraft and that are sort of looking for development that provide residual value guarantees. For us, that's huge. That allows us to be able to finance fleets. But it's not clear yet how this issue is going to get resolved.
I think it is a really big issue. I met with Senator Cantwell's people in Washington, D.C., and then Dean and I are members of the Washington State Electric Aviation Working Group. And one of the things that they identified was that very issue and the need potentially for the government to become involved initially in providing some guarantees on some of the loans for the residual values of the aircraft for the industry to take flight, because we thought the capital needs were going to be so great that it would be difficult. If we had to finance the growth of Volaris, of the purchase of the aircraft with 100% equity, I don't think we would have been able to get the business off the ground. I'm sorry, did Kevin and Patty, I'm not sure if you...
It is, I guess it's underlines again the importance of strategic investors, because they often would have the balance sheet to provide that residual value guarantee.
Good point. Other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, I see you three down here. Do one of you want to pick one of the questions and go for it?
Yeah, the top one, yes, and I'm here.
Yeah, likewise. Same here.
I mean, the thing is that someone in the previous panel mentioned this incremental approach to the market.
Dean.
And I think we see cargo as certainly an incremental aspect of that.
I'll take this one as well. We do cargo. We're not there yet on eVTOL. We'd like to be. They're just, as long as there's assets to collateralize, even if it's real estate, even if it's a hangar, we're there to support it. But unfortunately, not a lot comes across our desk that's there yet. There was another question about debt financing and whether or not it can be applied to future production.
Let's hold on just with the,
Okay, sorry.
to see, Kevin, if you want to take a crack at the answer that, or the question that was just posed?
I mean, yeah, we're interested in eVTOL and cargo, and just come and see me, send me an email.
As Dean pointed out, we're interested in the cargo side, and thank you, Alistair, for hosting Revolution.Aero in San Francisco, because Elroy Air pitched it at Revolution.Aero, won the pitch, and we invested in the company before the end of the year, so just a couple months later. So thank you very much for that. Next question. Their hurdle rate? What are your hurdle rates?
We don't disclose them.
Okay. So we're looking for a 5x and a 30% IRR, for earlier stage companies, and so and that has to be based on models that we believe in, not just the models that the management provides to us. And so I think that's something fairly standard. You'll see we've been able to achieve that in over more than a decade, and so it's something that's hard to do, but that's the goal. Any other comments on hurdle rates? Okay.
Just in terms of debt rates, our IRR needs to be around 12%, so for our investors. So we're looking at putting money out the door at like 8% at minimum. Yeah, so with regards to whether or not debt can be applied to future production, we get this question a lot, especially for early aircraft manufacturers. It really depends on the case-by-case basis. We do look at some of that. What we do is we structure construction loans. So as a company develops an aircraft, for example, then we would have incremental ownership of whatever it is that they produce. So that's our solution for it so far. Unfortunately, the answer is no. But hopefully that will evolve.
So I saw a question pop up on Airware. If you do a Google search on Airware, $118 million, you'll see the article that I was referring to. It doesn't cost much money to keep a website open, and my guess is that they're trying to sell the assets. If they did wind up getting another round of financing, God bless them. I wasn't aware of that, and I apologize for that. But the last I had heard is that they had, again, if you do the Google search, you'll see the article I'm referring to. Very good. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.